murder so toxic that medical examiners had to conduct the autopsy in hazmat suits. The entire attack was captured on surveillance footage and took mere seconds to conduct, but the planning had taken much longer. Ellie Tran lived long enough to make her own 911 call before losing consciousness and never regaining it. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna, and today's case is a Valentine's Day murder, but it is one where there was so much that could have been done beforehand, and these are the most infuriating cases for me to make, but I think some of the most important because we need that reminder to believe victims, but also to get things done the first time the victims ask, not after they have already been murdered. So let's go ahead and get into the story. If you are one of the many of us who are still trying to make up for the end of the year overspending, then I have something perfect for you because you can earn rewards with Misplay by simply discovering and playing mobile games. Here's a quick word from our sponsor, Misplay. You can play on Android on the Google Play Store or on iOS through the web app app.misplay.com. You can play a huge variety of games, and then you can redeem your points for gift cards to places like Amazon, Walmart, Visa, DoorDash, and so much more. Two of my favorites that I found from Misplay was The Walking Dead Road to Survival and Storm Shot Isle of Adventure. They were both this end of the world, save the world kind of thing, which I love, and it was the perfect escape while also being a crazy adventure. But with so many options on there are games that you will find that you will love no matter what kind of games you like. There are puzzles, there are word games, card games, adventure, and you get to earn rewards by finding games you like. It's so cool. So if this sounds like something of interest to you, then just download and sign up to get 200 bonus points at misplay.com/Brooke. And then if you use the code Brooke50 inside the game, you will get 50 extra points, and you're already starting to earn towards your first gift card. So let me know your favorite game you found through Misplay, and let's get back to the story. So it was 2017 in Virginia, and Ellie Mazon Tran lived in Virginia Beach where she took care of her parents. Now, her parents actually helped Ellie watch her 2-year-old daughter who was named Jolie. Now, this was while Ellie was the primary earner for the family, so she worked as a nail tech at H&L Nails and Tan Spa and Deluxe Nails and Spa as well. She worked at 2 different places. She was always working, and when she wasn't at work, which was rare, she was spending every moment playing with her daughter. She would teach her, she would make her laugh, she was teaching her about shapes and colors in the alphabet, and they were just always together and laughing. Ellie was known to radiate this positive energy, and it was thought to be because Jolie was such a silly little girl. But Ellie had been born in Vietnam with 5 siblings. She was the youngest, and around that time she never lived far from the family, but she had moved to the States around 2007 for a better life. Now, she landed in North Carolina, meeting a man named Joey and getting in a relationship with him. They fell pregnant in 2014, but split soon after, and Ellie ended up moving to Virginia Beach and asked her parents if they wanted to come to the States and move in with her, help take care of Jolie, and also just be around her. She would take care of them. So she was paying for the mortgage, the bills, the insurance, the health insurance, even for her parents, as they were 70 and 64 years old. Her parents didn't take advantage of her, though. They were doing chores around the house. There was always food on the table. Her father even worked at a restaurant part-time, but Ellie did make the most money, and she was always trying to tell her parents to just sleep and rest and not to worry about the home, but they did want to help her out. Her mother said that Ellie always took great care of the family, and she was sacrificing for her daughter at all times. She was a strong and independent woman, and she didn't mind. And by February 2017, Ellie was focused on saving money. So much so that her 31st birthday on February 12th, she didn't want any sort of birthday surprise. She didn't want a cake, a party, anything. However, 2 days later, she would be rushed to the hospital. You see, on February 14th, which was Valentine's Day, a little after 8 p.m., a 911 call would be made by a woman claiming that someone had shot her. Now, 15 minutes later, she was unable to breathe and losing consciousness. And when paramedics arrived at Still Meadow Court, they immediately rushed her to the Centera Princess Anne Hospital. 4 hours later, she was pronounced brain dead. Her parents were asked to decide if they were going to take her off of life support. And the next day, They did so, but the Virginia Beach Master Police Officer Tanya Pierce told the public that they believe that this attacker had touched Ellie in a manner that caused her to be ill. However, they were still working on her cause of death at this time. Now, Ellie's parents, who lived with her at the time, they didn't speak much English, but through a translator, they were able to inform police that they had surveillance cameras outside of their home that may have caught this. And they said that before the 911 call, Ellie had arrived home and they had actually heard her screaming in the driveway. She allegedly told her parents, "Merlino stuck something in my leg." When they got her inside, Ellie was telling them that it stung and it hurt really bad. Now, earlier that day, Ellie had taken her daughter Jolie for a walk around that very neighborhood. It was a safe neighborhood. They took a photo together, and they had no idea that that would be the last photo taken of Ellie alive. Because that Valentine's Day, her 2-year-old daughter would watch her mother jumping up and down outside, crying for help, and then slowly losing consciousness before being taken to the hospital. At this point, the surveillance footage outside of their home was obtained, and they would witness a figure jumping out of the bushes, knocking Ellie to the ground as she got out of her car and headed towards the front door. However, the image of this attacker seemed to be a bit distorted because they were wearing this high visibility jacket which reflected and made it very hard to see them. Though Ellie's mother claimed she knew exactly who the attacker was and identified him as Merlino, the same name her daughter had given her parents when she was first attacked. Now, investigators were quickly able to identify Merlino as 29-year-old Joseph Merlino III. He was the owner of a mobile phone repair shop, but most importantly, he was Ellie's ex-husband and the father of her child. But Joseph Merlino was located and taken down to the police department, and he told them that he was out of town on Valentine's Day. He was actually visiting family, specifically his mother in Victoria, which was around 100 miles away from Virginia Beach, around 3.5 hours. But to confirm his alibi, investigators would trace his cell phone data for that evening of Valentine's Day, and it did place him in Victoria. However, investigators were a bit suspicious because no calls or messages had been sent from that phone that night, even though they had been received. So they believed maybe Joseph wasn't with his phone that night. Though Joseph was claiming that he had moved on, he had another girlfriend that he had met through work when he had gone to China. She still lived over there, and that he was completely over Ellie. But it turned out that Ellie and Joey, who was Joseph, had met at a wedding. They were introduced by a mutual friend. He just kept asking for her phone number, and so when he wouldn't let up, she went ahead and gave it to him. And they were dating pretty soon after that. They dated for about 3 years, with Ellie living in his home for a few months after they found out they were pregnant in 2014. Now, that is when Ellie would tell Joseph that she really wanted her family to be involved when the baby came, and even wanted to maybe live with them. Joseph, though, didn't like this idea and would allegedly become very controlling of Ellie. A friend of Ellie would claim that at this time, Ellie wasn't sleeping. She would stay up all night worried and scared, and she would call her friend to just talk. 2 years later, so the baby was now 2 years old, in July of 2016, about 7 months before the murder, the police had gotten involved with this couple because Ellie had gone into the police station July 11th and confided in them that Joseph had grabbed her neck, had restrained her hands and feet, and then hung her upside down with her head almost touching the ground and threatening her that he was going to bury her in his backyard. She said she couldn't do anything while he did this to her, but their 2-year-old daughter was watching and screaming and crying. Now, Joseph was charged with assault of a family member, but the charge was dismissed, and instead he was fined for this. But Ellie got out from under his thumb at this point. Or so she thought. She moved into her own home. Her parents moved in with her. She took her daughter. But Joseph wasn't letting them go that easy, especially when the custody battle for Jolie began. And that would not be the only attack prior to Ellie's death, because on December 4th of 2016, so around 3 months prior to Ellie's murder, she'd been leaving her work at the nail salon around 7 p.m. when another car backed into hers. So obviously she got out to determine the damage, and she had a bottle of liquid thrown on her. She was rushed to the hospital, and they found that acid had actually been thrown on her. It burned her hair. If she hadn't have moved her face, it would have burned her skin as well. It was believed that Joseph had dressed up as a woman in a wig and a dress, trying to disguise himself as he attacked her. While Ellie obtained a restraining order, this did not stop Joseph, who was often following her, breaking into her home. Co-workers were walking her out to her car so she wasn't alone because she was so afraid. And Ellie was so fed up that she decided to go and purchase surveillance cameras for her home. Now, these cameras would capture the attack of Ellie by her ex, or so she and her parents claimed. Though with the distorted footage, it appeared as though the attacker knew that there was a camera and purposely wore a high visibility shirt to obscure the view.
I saw a lady running. She was screaming, running into the house. It's sad. I didn't think it was something like that.
When looking into Joseph's past, it was pretty normal, with the exception of him being homeschooled because he had been bullied. Though in his adult years, he would often mention his belief that he was in a mob with this mobster with the same name. Now, this was Joey Merlino, who was actually known as Skinny Joe and had taken over organized crime in Philadelphia in the mid-90s. He was essentially a mob boss. And so Joseph Merlino III seemed obsessed with his family, and then even claimed to police that Ellie's death could have been committed by this mob. Ellie was then determined to have died by poisoning. She had been injected with cyanide in a large dose. This was extremely lethal and could result in immediate death. These signs in the beginning could be dizziness, nausea, rapid breathing, weakness, seizures, loss of consciousness, foaming at the mouth, and showing signs of rapid heart failure. It would affect the lungs and the heart and was used as a method of execution due to the 100% guarantee of a quick death. Now, Ellie's death was reported as a malicious assault with no signs of visible trauma. When she had claimed to her family, to the 911 dispatcher, that she had been shot, she had actually meant stabbed by a syringe. But her body was then deemed toxic by medical examiners. The amount of cyanide in her system caused them to have to wear hazmat suits to conduct the autopsy, because it could be lethal if they did not protect themselves, whether they got it in their mouth, whether it touched their skin, especially though if they inhaled some of that poison as they were opening up her body. After talking to Joseph, who technically had an alibi at this point, they also found that he was a regular at a local pizza shop. When investigators went to speak to the owners, they informed him that back in January, a month prior to the attack, they received a package addressed to him. Now, they weren't close friends with him. This was quite odd, and the owner said when Joseph arrived to get his meal, they told him there was a package for him, and he walked into the kitchen, he grabbed it, and he left. The pizza owner had no idea what was in this package. Joseph Merlino's computer was then searched, and it was discovered that there were searches made about cyanide poisoning, including how much cyanide does it take to kill someone. And he searched for syringes as well. He had also booked an upcoming flight to China, where his girlfriend lived. A woman then came forward to police claiming that she had shipped a package to Joseph Merlino to a pizza shop. She lived in New Hampshire. She sold vintage syringes for $68 on Etsy, and she had said that a man in Virginia Beach had bought one. Joseph Merlino III was then charged with murder, and once arrested, he refused all interviews. When it was time for the bond hearing, Ellie's friends and family showed up to the courthouse with signs saying "Justice for Ellie, no bail. She was murdered," and no bond was given. Now, while awaiting trial, Joseph went on a 2-month hunger strike, losing 40 pounds, and he proclaimed his innocence, claiming that he was being held in solitary confinement and wasn't even able to study his defense. But prosecution claimed that Joseph wasn't eating because he was trying to look different than he did on that surveillance footage. However, he did then do an interview with News 3 and claimed that there was a completely reasonable reason why he was not eating, and that it was just the surface of the iceberg with a huge development at the bottom. He also mentioned that the conditions in jail were poor. He said, I believe in the saying, if you're not willing to stand up for your rights, what rights do you have? That's all I'm saying. What rights do you have in this country if you're not willing to stand up like so many people have in this country? They want me to make a mistake and maybe say something wrong so they can declare me incompetent and can force a tube down my throat and force feed me, which is totally unnecessary at this point. But prison staff were saying that his hunger strike was costing them about $100,000 a week for the medical care and the amount of attention they had to give him to make sure that he was still alive every 15 minutes.
And I don't have the resources to maintain that. And it's not fair. It's not fair to the public to spend their dollars on somebody that wants to cause these problems.
But while in jail, Joseph was then found to have been sending messages to several different people through letters. This included his mom and his girlfriend, but these were encoded. Some were asking for help to create an alibi and to pretend to be his mother and his family. Joseph then began using another inmate to make phone calls and send letters for him. He would stand next to this inmate while he was on the phone with his mother, and he would be directing him. So the inmate then became a police informant who confessed that Joseph was instructing people on how to testify in court. This informant also claimed that Joseph had hinted about a hitman, but referred to it as pizza being ordered. Now, Ellie's sister, Fee, who was actually her older sister, she still lived in Vietnam, and she began the process of trying to get a visa to attend her sister's funeral. She wanted to also come to the States to help her mom and dad because now they had no means of an income. And she was also very close with Ellie, even though they lived so far apart. In fact, Ellie was going to sponsor 2 of her siblings to come to move to America with her before she passed. Now, when Fee finally arrived and was going through her sister's belongings, she would find a journal, and this is where Ellie had written all of her feelings, starting all the way from when she first moved to the States and her hardships in America. And Fee said that she couldn't have done what her sister had done, but her sister did it, and it made her proud. Ellie had also written about the controlling nature of her relationship with Joseph, and after reading all of this, Fee said that Ellie is the strongest person that she knows. Now, Fee was able to stay to attend the trial, which began in June of 2018, and Joseph was pleading not guilty, smiling while he walked into the courtroom wearing a yellow jumpsuit, which is often for inmates of disciplinary status for being assaultive or breaking rules. Now, his defense started to claim that due to the extensive media coverage, it would be impossible to find an unbiased jury there, and they asked for the trial to be moved, but this was denied. The defense also wanted some evidence from Joseph's home specifically to be thrown out because it might impact the jury. This was evidence such as ammunition, tactical gear, gun paraphernalia, and chemicals. Again, this was denied. Because the search of Joseph's home actually involved firefighters in hazmat suits with a bomb squad. They shut off the street telling everybody to stay away, and then they found materials used to make explosives.
I actually said, oh my God, I hope everything's okay. And I tried to get information, but of course no one's giving me any information.
Morlino's neighbors say he hasn't been the same since his father died 6 years ago.
But also at his business, they found a chemical called DMSO, or dimethyl sulfoxide, which allowed for injections to be able to penetrate into the system better. His defense continued to claim that Joseph was out of town and he couldn't have driven back due to his car being damaged when he hit a deer on the way there. Joseph was trying to tell the judge that he wasn't satisfied with how his attorneys were handling the case, but this was pretty much just dismissed. But the prosecution's first witness was Ellie's mother, and she began crying out, "Oh my God, my daughter," as the surveillance footage was shown to the court. She explained that her daughter was terrified that night and she knew it was Morlino. She said she herself recognized Morlino as he was running down the street just due to the way he was walking, his side profile, his beard. And at this point, she had to be taken out of the courtroom because of becoming overly emotional. However, during Ellie's mother's cross-examination, a charge filed against her mother was brought up to the court. Now, this had happened a year prior on July 5th of 2016 when Joseph Morlino had filed an assault and battery charge against Ellie's elderly mother, saying that she assaulted him when he tried to pick up Jolie from their home. Merlino said that she had motioned for him to put the baby down, and when he refused, she grabbed his shirt and scratched his face and his arm. 6 days after this incident was when Ellie had gone to the police about Joseph's abuse, saying that he threatened to put her underground. Her mother was still found guilty of assault 3 months later, though she appealed this, and then it was dismissed. 2 months after this dismissal was when Ellie had that acid thrown on her in the parking lot. It was day 3 of the trial, and the prosecution called more witnesses, one being an anonymous undercover detective who took the stand. He was identified as an expert in computers, telling the court that he found searches on Joseph's laptop that were made in January 2017 that included how many milligrams of cyanide will kill you, what if cyanide gets in the bloodstream, what if cyanide gets injected. Then the Etsy seller also took the stand to confirm that she sold Joseph a hypodermic needle and sent it to that pizza shop. Then a code breaker named Jeannie Anderson was brought in to testify about the jailhouse letters that Joseph was sending. She had decoded the messages that Joseph was sending to his girlfriend, claiming that he was trying to fabricate evidence and an alibi. He had asked her to create a false chat log and to get friends to say that they had seen them FaceTiming during the time of the murder. He was also telling his mother to pressure witnesses to take back statements. Then FBI Special Agent Wendell Kazinza had testified that Joseph's phone had pinged near Victoria on February 13th and February 15th, where he claimed he was on Valentine's Day. However, no outgoing activity occurred on Valentine's Day. And then a doctor was asked to testify about the effects of cyanide, and he described how quickly it could be changed from a solid to a liquid depending on what form it came in and how immediate the death could be. Basically, there was no saving Ellie after she was injected, especially with that large of a dose. The defense then began calling their witnesses, starting with Joseph's half-brother Alex. Alex claimed that he was with Joseph the night of the murder on Valentine's Day in Victoria, that Joseph had arrived and his car was damaged, and he said he had hit a deer on the way. Then he allegedly stayed for days, choosing not to get his car fixed, and they said that Valentine's Day night they actually went out in his car and it got overheated, so they had to go and find antifreeze so they could make it home. Then Joseph Merlino himself took the stand, and he said he had no involvement in Ellie's death. He also denied searching cyanide on his computer, saying that it was a business computer and half a dozen people in the business had access to it. He appeared calm at first, only getting emotional when he was reading letters he had sent to his girlfriend in China, and it appeared as though he believed he was going to be found not guilty. But then the prosecutor began the cross-examination of Joseph, and he began to get angry. The prosecutor wanted to know how somebody else would have been able to make these searches on the laptop, since it seemed as though it was a personal computer, and that they knew he was trying to create an alibi in those encoded letters, and Joseph did not like hearing this. Now, after the jury deliberated for an hour and a half, Joseph Merlino was found guilty of first-degree murder, and his sentencing was scheduled for December 5th. He then conducted a jailhouse interview that they had the wrong person. He also claimed that he wasn't worried about his sentencing because he was worried about the appeal. He said he was reading up on lots of case laws and it would be an automatic reversal of a new trial due to him telling the judge he was not happy with his attorneys and nothing happening.
It was a huge mistake for justice. And the wrong person sitting right now. No evidence linking me to anything. If I wanted to kill myself, that's what they claim, I would stop drinking entirely. I'm hoping that this insidious justice that has been brought over these past 2 years won't fall into someone else's hands. And hopefully I can get some case laws out of it under my name.
He said he was puzzled that someone could be prosecuted when they weren't ready. He then said that he and Ellie weren't divorced or anything like that. There was nothing bad going on between them. They just had a few disagreements. However, when it was time for his sentencing hearing, he was brought into the courtroom in a gurney/wheelchair. He was unresponsive and began shaking, foaming at the mouth, and the jail doctor believed that he was in some sort of stress-related mental condition. And he had started acting that way that morning.
According to these documents, on December 5th, around 6:45 in the morning, cameras showed Joseph Merlino having a conversation with a Virginia Beach sheriff's deputy. The deputy says she told Merlino he had court in the morning and he needed to get dressed, but he told her his case was continued. She says he didn't appear to be in any sort of distress. Fast forward about an hour, documents say Merlino is seen hanging a bedsheet to obstruct the view of the camera. A deputy comes in about 15 minutes later and finds Merlino on the floor unresponsive. According to court documents, he then found a plastic bag with juice powder and water with a straw attached to it. The deputy says Merlino had dried juice powder on the side of his face.
So even though they believe this was an act, the sentencing still had to be rescheduled. But when it finally came, it only took 15 minutes for him to be sentenced to life. Now, he did appeal this, and this was denied. And Ellie's sister, Fee, spoke up saying that justice had been made under American law.
Thank you so much. I want to say my deeply appreciated from my family to the judge, to the prosecutor, attorneys, to the detective for their very hard working long time day, and for the very great grand jury that helped us during the course. It's very difficult to talk about this. It is a very broken heart, and we missing our Ellie day after day. We suffer every day. Yeah, and whenever I look into my niece, my Ellis will come to us. Yeah, and how can I tell you what I feel? This I cannot express about this. Sorry about this. Ali, that is our sweetie sister that I have, that we have. She's so nice, so sacrificed for the family. She loves Jolie almost everything. That is her piece of gold. That's her last sentence she talked to her daughters. It's the sister that I will remember of every day all my life.
But by this point, Joseph had continued his hunger strike for 50 days, and his own prosecutors sought permission to have him force-fed in an emergency hearing. Now, this case was postponed after Joseph said he would start to drink liquids, and it was later decided by a judge that even with his hunger strike, he wouldn't be force-fed by the prison guards. The judge said he just didn't feel like he had authority to give permission for that. But after this, the Virginia Beach Department of Human Services petitioned for a protective order against Joseph based on the neglect and abuse of a child. They found evidence that he had abused or neglected the child and wanted to transfer custody to the maternal grandparents, as well as have the child placed under a permanent protective order. The court had found that this child had watched her mother's agonizing, slow, and painful death. The court also believed that the encoded messages from the jailhouse to his family means that he would try to make attempts to contact the child. Now, this was because Ellie's parents were fighting for full custody of Jolie. They wanted to stay in America. They wanted to raise their granddaughter. The problem was they didn't necessarily have a means of income, no jobs, they couldn't speak English very well, and so the Love Foundation Corp of Virginia actually came forward to help them. And they wanted to help them not only with finances, but things like getting a driver's license, communicating with the social services, and basically just helping them in their lives to be able to keep their granddaughter. Ellie's father made a statement that was translated into, "If I could die and give life to Ellie, I would." And Ellie's daughter, Jolie, didn't understand where her mother went at only 2 years old. Every time the door would open, her grandparents say that she runs towards the door and she yells, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy." And Ellie's mom said, "You can grow up without a grandmother's love, that's fine. But a mother's love is crucial." And so now they were working so hard to make sure that little Jolie is still feeling that amount of love when her mother was ripped away from her by her own father.
I don't even want to hear his name anymore. I don't want to see him. I don't have anything to say to him.
And although Joseph has never given a motive for murder, it was believed that this murder stemmed from the custody battle between the two of them for their daughter, but even more so just the revenge that his girlfriend had left him and taken the child. And it was as simple as that for him. He made a plan. He made sure it was a lethal dose. And he knew that there was no chance of saving Ellie after this. It makes me so happy to hear that her grandparents are getting the help that they need to work with social services to be able to raise their grandchild, because the last thing she needs is to be put into foster care after losing her mother and her father. She needs to be with people who know her, who she trusts, who she loves, and who loves her unconditionally. It's just amazing to me that there's so many of these custody battles that turn into murders where the mother or the father end up taking the other parent's life, not thinking of how that's going to affect their child, not caring. There has to be more that we can do when restraining orders are given where they can actually be upheld, where it's not a piece of paper that can so easily be ripped up and ignored. And I'm really not sure if the motive had anything to do with the custody of their daughter, because Joseph had booked a flight to China that it was assumed was his getaway and did not have a seat booked for Jolie. Had you heard of this case? Have you ever heard of a case where a body is so toxic that medical examiners have to wear hazmat suits? Let me know, but don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay.